This is Basic Atari 8-bit podcast.
I remember being stumped. How are we going to get something with gears to move 1/100th degree? It just won't happen because the slop in a gear would exceed that. I said, that's it. We're going to have a spiral gear, and we'll have the equivalent of a phonograph arm, and it will track to 1/100th of a degree without a problem.
Hi, I'm Kevin Savitz, and this is an interview episode of Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. If you read certain computer magazines from the early days of microcomputers, magazines like Byte, Family Computing, Computing and InCider, you might see long black and white strips of barcodes. Those are computer programs encoded for use with the Cauzin Softstrip reader. Introduced in 1985, the Cauzin Softstrip was a hardware peripheral that attached to your Apple II, Macintosh, or IBM computer. There was no Atari version. It optically read the printed two-dimensional barcodes, which were published in those magazines and in books, allowing you to quickly input data, for instance, inputting programs without having to laboriously type them in. This interview is with two of the people at that company. Bob Brass was co-founder of Cauzin, along with Jack Goldman, who has passed away, and Peter D'Amato, who was manager of OEM and VAR support at Cauzin from 1984 through 1988. This interview took place on October 5th, 2015. Bob, why don't you tell me about the prehistory of the company, about what caused the founding of Cauzin to happen?
Sure. A little bit of my background is I've had an avocation which has been very successful over the years of inventing. And a larger portion of my inventions prior to, I'd say, 1980 were in the game and toy business. And what this started actually with a friend of mine who I've known now for 45 years, a fellow named Rick Mason, who's I met when I was at Xerox, and I had this idea of trying to create, as I'm talking about it, you'll say, well, gee whiz, this is such a normal thing. But back then it wasn't that normal. I was going to create a simulation of driving sports cars through various different tracks or through the road. And did a little bit of research on it and said, okay, there's certain things you have to know: horsepower, suspension, a few things like that.
What year are we talking? Give me a year.
When did we start Cauzin? 83?
Yeah, early 80s.
It had to be about 1980, 80, 81. And so at that time, memory was fairly expensive. And so I had to figure out, how can I load the information? I said, well, how about barcode? And I realized that barcode wouldn't do it. So I said, I think we can do two-dimensional barcode. And at that time, I don't believe anything existed at that time as two-dimensional barcode.
There was no such thing.
There was no such thing, right? So Rick is also an excellent photographer. So I was living at the time in Westport, Connecticut. And in my basement, I had a bathroom, which had no windows, so it became the dark room. And we just experimented with how small, and this sounds very trivial, but it was not trivial in 1980. How small could you make a black dot on a piece of paper and be able to detect it? And so we just did a tremendous amount of experimenting. And then I don't know how it made the transition from being a toy into, gee, that would be very interesting if we provided this as a two-dimensional, it wasn't barcode, as a two-dimensional code that could be read and put on a piece of paper and serve as basically a ROM. And so that's why it started.
It seems like quite a jump from, wow, we're putting dots on paper, to we're going to make those dots turn into computer programs. That's a...
Well, My background was in the computer area. I was, prior to joining Xerox, which I was at the time, I was at Bell Labs and was very much involved in developing computers. So it was a very natural thing to me to make that transition.
It was also, you have to remember back at that, go back in time, in the days really before modems, when a modem was only something, was a very high-tech piece of gear you found in a back office at a financial institution or something. There, you didn't go to the local store and buy a modem. There was no such thing. And Byte magazine was actually at the forefront at the time, trying to publish software using traditional, at the time, standard 3 of 9 barcode, and they would devote pages to a couple of thousand bytes of code for some dopey little game or something. So it all kind of came together.
Yeah, publishing code was a fairly common thing, and there were several magazines that specialized in the whole computer industry. Byte was one of them, and they would, sometimes you'd see on a page, you see 4 or 5 paragraphs, and here's another computer program you can use.
Right. Did you approach the magazines and say, okay, we have this idea, or did you develop the hardware before you approached the magazines? Do you remember kind of the order of how things happened there?
Yeah. We really worked very hard on the technology first, and there are about 2 or 3 key people that came in. One was really an exceptional individual who really understood circuits. Another one was a kind of a digital guy, and then we had a programmer. This is the kind of the initial 3, and spent a tremendous amount of time trying to see what sort of encoding technique to use, and basically how to be able to detect it. What sort of density could we provide? And finally, how could we make this, I wouldn't say disaster proof, but how could we make it such that if things got ripped or whatever, you could still read it? So it was really very much of a technical element. And I was not at Xerox at the time, and the person who I knew very well, Jack Goldman, had been at Xerox headquarters in charge of all of the top person in R&D, basically, and engineering. And he had left Xerox at that time, and he became very interested in it and said, gee, I know a few people who might put some money up. I mean, that's pretty much the way it went. Well, the money came before the additional people, and it was really Jack's connections that made that possible.
Jack was, I remember going to his home once. He was a very, very modest, just the greatest guy you ever want to know. And sitting over in the corner was a golden shovel. And I said, Jack, why is there a shovel in your living room? He said, well, that was, he broke ground. He turned the first shovel of dirt on the Palo Alto Research Park for Xerox. So he was a high-powered technologist, certainly, at the time, and you kind of never know talking to him when he never bragged about it. But it was like, wow, that was, there's the shovel that started Palo Alto Park Research, which, as you know, and as your listeners will know, back in the day had all kinds of crazy ideas about things that nobody ever would think of. A mouse.
That's right.
Right.
Network, networking computers together, and just so amazing technologists. Another piece of interesting trivia that I always enjoyed was the name of the company, Cauzin. And of course, that is Cauzin, Robert Brass being
Copper and zinc,
and Jack Goldman, gold being AU.
So that's where it came from.
Anagram those elements together, and that was how the company was named. Initial company, and then at some point the name legally changed to Softstrip Incorporated.
It was after I had left, but quite later. There were some other interesting things. Jack was quite an unusual person. and a lot of fun. The reason I knew him quite well when I was at Xerox is, and this will sound very strange and certainly bring a smile to all sorts of people who follow companies, but Jack and I, this is corporate headquarters, which probably had 500 people, were the only two people with technical backgrounds in the corporation at that time. And so we kind of gravitated towards each other and chatted about things.
Sure.
Another thing, I thought actually as Pete was talking about going to his house, there was another story. There was a Fortune magazine in which happened to list the top 100 wealthiest people in the United States. Mm-hmm. And when I had gone to see Jack at his house one of the first times, and it was lying there, and I was waiting for him, and I started shuffling through, and I noticed about maybe 10 or 15, maybe 20% of them had a little check mark on them. And so I asked Jack, what's going on? He said, oh, those are the people I know personally. So he was really a character. He really was.
Yeah.
And very brilliant.
And funding was never a problem.
It was never a problem.
Not to get too far off topic, but just Jack's stories were. I remember at one point he had a group of potential investors in, and typical, as they were called, probably still are called, vulture capitalists.
Yes.
Sat around the table, and he just quietly came in, started the meeting, and they just started rattling off their demands and expectations and what they would need and what they would want. And he simply stood up and said, no, turned around and walked out of the room. And went and got us money elsewhere. Right. Yeah, that's right. But so that was that was, as Bob said, it was started very much on a technology. Creating the 2D code, which has become somewhat ubiquitous. You look on your boarding pass, you look on the back of many licenses, you see that, and it did start as the idea of a toy.
Exactly.
Morphed into for a time we tried marketing it as a paper modem, because modem technology did start to come down market, and you did start to find folks hooking modems up to their computers, and we thought, well, this is an alternative or a competitive, and then that eventually morphed into more business types of applications, and Department of Defense was very interested in just anywhere that they needed to get lots of information stuck on the side of something, manufacturing applications and so forth, and
automobile parts, or basically mechanical parts.
Yeah, aircraft parts where they need to.
That's right. They have to track them.
Lots of detail. And
did anything ever come of the business application stuff, the enterprise use and government use?
Eventually it did, not under Softstrip. At that point, then the patents and the technology, the company was sold,
right?
And there were a number of suitors along the way. We had an interesting with Kodak. Yes. We had a very interesting relationship for a while with Kodak.
Here's a very intriguing. It's like the oh my gosh, it happened, and what if it didn't happen? The group in Kodak that actually they invested in us, and they gave us money, and then we also had a joint venture with Kodak, and that group had the camera that was similar to Polaroids. Mm-hmm. And so if you go back in history, you'll see that Kodak was actually in that business briefly, and Polaroid had a suit against them and won. Mm-hmm. And when they won, that the division or the group that was really in our joint venture basically folded. Everything was kind of ready for launch, and then Polaroid won a suit, the division folded, and the development that was ongoing, and I remember his first name was Bob. I don't remember his last name, who was in charge of it. And they were looking to do a lot of publishing, and particularly putting things in advertisement. And it actually had morphed into something that would look like a computer today. And you would slide in where you see the keyboard right now. It would have keys, at least printed keys, and there'd be a soft strip along the bottom. And as you slide it in, it would read the program. And so you would have perhaps here is cook a cake, or here is how to make a photograph, or whatever it was. So each program contained the information. It would be a standard piece of paper that comes out of a magazine. Mm-hmm. And so that was the thing they were developing.
Again, days long before the internet. As a way of, I remember they were calling it, or they categorized it as an information appliance.
That's right.
They wanted to see this appliance, which today we would call a laptop connected to the internet. They wanted to see just a Kodak appliance on every desk, on every counter, and every room of the house potentially. Receiving all of its information through printed, of course, an optical process, which is what Kodak was all about.
Their distribution would have been a page in the magazine with an advertisement, but the keyboard laid out the soft strip to have the program slide it in, and away you go.
Interesting. Wow. I had read something online in my research that Kodak had invested or bought the company, and then they thought it was, the theory I read was that they thought it was competition for their upcoming magnetic media, which was going to be the big thing. So they bought it and buried it, and I was just like, that doesn't make a lot of sense.
That's total nonsense.
Yeah.
Well, lacking facts, you can make up very interesting stories.
Oh yeah, it was a good story. Yeah,
sure it was.
Yeah.
It was really what really destroyed it was the fact that Polaroid won the lawsuit and put that division out of business.
All right, so I want to get back to the paper modem thing, which is how I became aware of Cauzin, and how probably most listeners here, seeing the strips printed in magazines. Mostly, I think I saw them in your own advertisements saying like, hey, here's a program that does something. You don't have to type it in, just use your reader. And I found a list of magazines that you guys that ran your strips. I'm assuming in an unpaid way. Family Computing and Computing and InCider.
That was InCider.
Tell me about that. I mean, was it really a chicken and egg problem of they didn't want to run your strips for free until you had sold a lot of readers, and you couldn't sell readers until they were running?
I don't think it was a chicken and an egg thing with those people. I remember InCider. There were a couple of magazines that did it every single month, because basically they were devoting one page, and which they had no problem with at the time. I just think it was certainly chicken and egg, in the sense that if you have a reader that doesn't read much, what are you going to do? Well, we did have a program which allowed you to print your own soft strips, which of course you read in with a soft strip reader. So I think that was part of the issue too. It definitely was chicken and egg.
Yeah, I think I seem to recall at least one of the magazines, might have been Byte at the time, kind of had their nose out of joint, because I think they had been publishing their standard barcode. They were kind of trying to do something similar, didn't have the technology. We come along with the technology, and I had just joined the company at that time, at the point where really sales marketing was starting to ramp up.
Right.
And I got the distinct impression there was, they saw us as a threat to whatever they had in mind, their plans. And also timing was, technology moves very fast. I mean, it moves light speed today, but even then, the year we were kind of counting on the big launch, the big explosion was when personal modems kind of started to become under $100 or under $200, whatever the price point was at that point. And so it kind of pushed us off into the more business application direction. And then it was a timing thing where, as Bob said, our primary suitor, partner, financial and technological partner. I mean, Kodak was giving us a lot of. I remember spending a lot of time with their optics specialists, and they taught us some tricks on plastic lens molding and all kinds of. And we had just started to develop, business applications. The trade show badge,
right,
was one.
There was something for the pharmaceutical, where they would put the information.
Right. The information in the strip on inside the packaging. Right. The DoD looking at it for temporary duty orders.
Right.
Where and it's I mean, at the time it was the only way to get, or at least a viable way to get information across disparate platforms. In the day of everybody and their brother had their own operating system and their own. It was, and imagine the DoD with all kinds of technology worldwide. They really saw it as a great opportunity. But we needed a fair amount of capital to kind of reinvent the device itself and make a industrial reader as opposed to the consumer type product. And with the loss of funding through Kodak, and then things kind of, I guess it ultimately sell to, was it Symbol Technology?
Yeah, well, no, there's a very interesting story there because we were also surpassed by the two-dimensional barcode technologies. Ours was a different encoding technique, and Symbol was one of the real powers in barcode. And they went to two-dimensional barcode using the conventional barcode, but with a scanner which actually did a kind of a Ligizou type of scan, which they use today. And so that coding technique really took over the standard. And then they played it right in the sense that they approached the whole idea of two-dimensional barcoding from a standards organization, which, of course, since they were very much at the time in, let's call it the one-dimensional barcode, and involved in those standards committees, they had the culture to do it. And so what you see now is really two-dimensional barcode, and what we had was a different type of encoding technique. It was more, let's put it this way, it was more as like an FM type of encoding, where the current one is more like an AM type of, speaking of radio.
We were more linear. The two-dimensional barcodes are a fixed pattern. I mean, it's an image and a pattern, whereas the soft strip, as you know, is you don't read it in one shot. You read it, and continue reading it for as long as you could print a strip. So it was different in that regard.
I know that you guys offered software so you could print strips at home. Did you guys ever publish the standard? Like if someone wanted to do it today as a hobby thing, is that published anywhere? Do you guys have any papers on it?
It was. Yeah. It was. There was we actually sold it as a soft strip that you'd read in the software to allow you to print it. And along with it was a description of the standard, yes.
Does that exist anywhere? Or is it only in soft strip format?
I might have somewhere in one of the boxes in the basement, I might have one of those still left.
If you find it, I would like to see it.
I don't recall, I don't know that we ever published the standard. We published enough of the specs to, you still had to use our core piece of code, our library, our I don't know that we ever published the actual specs that any programmer start from scratch and produce.
Oh, I don't know if they
not that level of standard or that level of disclosure as to but we create a library of that you would call and provide parameters, and so we publish standards on how to test your particular printer. Again, the days where it was all dot matrix laser was just coming onto and again, you only saw lasers in high-end business applications. So for the home user, it was all dot matrix. And every manufacturer had its own dot size and accuracy of the print head. So you had to do some tests and do some readings to see. And then you could set the parameters of these library calls to then, connect create enough software to be able to, point it at your data file and have it produce a readable strip on your particular dot matrix.
One of the things that would be rather interesting is the initial soft strips that we made for publication. We printed them on a standard width printer, which would be the 11-inch, I guess it was 11-inch width, and it would be about 10 feet long. And we were in an old factory, so we would actually put it up on the wall, and Rick Mason, also as a photographer, he would photograph that and reduce it to the size so it would be newspaper size. And the reason we did that is in order to get the accuracy of the print for each of the little dots in there. You had to, you couldn't do it right off of a dot matrix printer because you might get 100 per square inch. By doing it, by photographing it down and treating the accuracy of the reduced one for a magazine printing, we got it over to 500 characters per inch.
This was again in the day I remember years on. Right, the initial process was that print a strip 10 times its size and then photo reduce it and send a photo to
the publisher.
Linotype technology was just the Linotype laser typesetting systems.
Oh, right.
Were just kind of becoming generally available, and I forget who we had made some arrangement with someone and ended up with it was a $40,000 or $50,000 Linotype machine in the office because they wanted us to develop soft strip,
right.
An application basically for this printer, a driver, if you will, that could directly produce soft strip images for for print.
Right, at print size.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Could you have gone? I assume you are limited by the dots per inch in a magazine. Assuming no magazine constraint, if you went off the photographs you were making, could you have gotten even more? Was the resolution that it could read even better than what was available for magazines?
Yes, it was limited by the reader, and of course this was before you had the semiconductor chip that had the reading capability, and this was a very, very interesting analog device that had the base was a very sophisticated digital system and a very sophisticated feedback system that was analog. There was an interesting story that is kind of fun. One of the necessities of this particular reader is that we had to be able to move the lens itself. Think of the lens that read this. You had to try to line it up actually with the dots themselves. Mm-hmm. And so you'd line it at the beginning and it would get in place. And then you had to be able to move that something like 1/100th of a degree. Mm-hmm. So I remember being stumped. How are we going to get something with gears to move 1/100th degree? It just won't happen because the slop in a gear would exceed that. I remember sitting in part of the house, which was kind of a relaxation area, that we had a phonograph, or a high fidelity set, it was called. I remember staring at it trying to think, how can we possibly do that? And I noticed that the arm that held the needle, if you look how many times the rotation went around and how it moves so very slowly, I said, that's it. We're going to have a spiral gear, and we'll have the equivalent of a phonograph arm, and it will track to 100th of a degree without a problem.
Oh, neat. Nice. And I read also that it's something that you were thinking of having a motorized, maybe this is something else, a motorized reader.
Oh, we had one.
Is that from going from one strip to the other on a page?
No, we had one. A card reader, where you imagine a card reader, and you've got the soft strip on the card. Mm-hmm. And this was something, for example, that we were thinking and actually did for registration at a convention, where you print the card and have the soft strip in the back. And you put it in very much as you would do today, and the card would be pulled in, read, popped out.
Sort of suck it through as it read. I see. Huh. Neat.
Well, actually pulled it in, turned it around, send it out. And it was fairly small, and it was a convenience as opposed to having to position the soft strip reader, which was about a foot long, on the page to give it at least a partial, fairly good relationship to the strip itself.
So the soft strip reader was, I know, available for the Apple II, and I read it was also available for the Macintosh and the IBM. Did those products actually exist?
Yes.
Yep, that was, again, one of our main things was the ability to go cross-platform in days when, well before internet or any other viable means. I mean, other than rekeying data from one system into another, SoftStrip really plugged a gap there.
Yeah, I still have a reader that the group made for me, a SoftStrip reader with the actual container for the device itself was clear, so you could see the internal. You could see how you could see it like a little train that kind of went on a little set of tracks all the way up and then went back.
How cool! Did you consider an Atari version?
I don't know that ever.
Well, there's another story. I just
Is there?
Pete was not aware of that until today. Actually, I knew the people at Atari, and somebody had just going from the toy industry over to the working for Atari, and I think was involved in R&D, and we knew each other pretty well. And he said, "Do you think you can do something with what you're doing for Atari?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "I'll send you some stuff." Well, these 2, 3, or 4 cartons arrived with every single.
That was with
an Atari. I'm trying to remember the name of the Motorola chip, 635. That's not the right.
6502.
Yes, right. It was driven by that and everything. They had readers, and barcode. They had a barcode reader.
What today they would have called a SDK, software development kit. It was pretty much the keys to the kingdom.
Right. It took me more time to unpack it than actually to play with it. I never did anything, but so that was my interaction with Atari.
Yeah, it probably again was a timing thing. I don't, Atari or even I don't remember doing anything with Commodore or any of the.
No, we did.
We were very quickly morphing to business applications when we realized, things were not going to expand as we thought they might on the consumer. Published software, published printed software arena.
I would also not suggest that you take any information from Wikipedia, because what's written there is completely incorrect.
Yeah.
And I promised myself one of these days that I would offer corrections to it, and I haven't gotten to that point yet.
For instance, like what do you see on Wikipedia and you're just like, that is so totally wrong?
Oh, the whole story.
There's someone that claims to be the originator that I can certainly attest. I am sitting next to the originator. The person on Wikipedia came way late in the
Yes, he did.
in the game, and
He was an assistant actually to someone who was doing programming.
Yeah. And has his own reasons for wanting to create an online resume for himself. But yeah,
Wikipedia is always right.
well, they got the spelling right. They got the name right. Softstrip, Cauzin, they got some of the dates right, but most of the rest of it is.
One of the things that was truly a pleasure in retrospect, and Pete certainly verified this, we had, I would say, 3 people, one of which particularly was probably the most outstanding optical I would say, engineer in the world.
John
Glaberson. And he was so good that we had brought in, before we hired John, and I'll get to the optics in a second, expand on that, the person who was considered to be the expert in the East Coast. And then we brought in John, and we realized just how incredible he was. I mean, the circuitry, the understanding of the optics, and the optics are quite complex. And he designed them, and
his grasp of he was a physicist. His degree was in physics, and at the time I was very, very young. And just in fact, I think when I first joined, I might have still been in school, in college for electrical engineering. And the opportunity to work alongside John and his grasp of electronics, of mechanics, of optics, of material properties, I was just blown away. That was an awesome experience.
This is terribly technical, but what he designed, first of all, he was brilliant in analog circuitry. He designed the servo that kept the lenses lined up with the strip as it was being written, or read rather, something which is called a phase lock loop. Mm-hmm. And his was a phase lock loop within a phase lock loop within a phase lock loop. And it's like it's a feedback circuit within a feedback circuit within a feedback circuit. It is an absolutely brilliant, brilliant design. And then we had the person who was really our digital expert. He took the digital elements and turned that into a large-scale integrated circuit, which also include the analog. I mean, it was one of in terms of technology, it was an extraordinary bit of technology.
It must have been heartbreaking when it didn't fly. You did all this work and ultimately it didn't go.
Like every startup, I mean, at the time I had been, Cauzin was probably my second or third startup at the time. I probably went on to, life was an emotional roller coaster.
Yes.
You went from weeks of absolute euphoria that things, couldn't possibly get any better to weeks of, things couldn't possibly get any worse. And on every front, whether it was financing, whether it was technology, whether it was the business, whatever. So, so I'd say, by the time things wound down, it was just part of the normal ups and downs. And when we realized we probably weren't going to come back from this down, and then at that point, like I said, ultimately the patents and everything got sold to, who was the final suitor? I thought it was Symbol, but not.
No, it was an English, he was English, and I don't remember the name. But it was a very exciting thing to go through. And it's as Pete said, the ups were up, the downs were down. It actually is, if you took a roller coaster and you multiplied the height and you took the low part and you dug it in the hole. And that's what it was like. You're either going up one of them, on the top of them, going down, whatever it is. But a good example, when we got the first, and this was probably at the time and I'm trying to remember the name of the company that did it. Very, very well known. But it was the most sophisticated LSI they had ever done. This is a combination of both digital and analog. And we got the first chip, and it didn't work.
We crashed their.
And it turned out, fortunately, I'm looking at the table here, which is probably 3 feet by, I'd say 10 feet. Well, the circuit that we built to test out what was done in LSI would have fit on this table and hung over a little bit. So just testing to find out what the problem was, which turned out to be an easy one to solve. I remember
the first iteration of the chip, it was just totally dead, completely dead, and under a microscope, it was determined that the software, the code that was etching, creating the layouts etching, had just drawn what looked like little sailboats all over the chip. And so we just realized at that point, we just were pushing even this at that time. Large scale integration was in its infancy, and we were pushing that technology beyond its limits.
There was, speaking about John and the optics. When Kodak invested in us, and we had the joint venture to develop that, is we were actually injecting molding extremely complex optics. And John went to visit them, John Glaberson, to see what he could learn about, because we ended up buying an injection molding machine. We ended up making our own molds, and John actually ended up polishing them with a series of finer and finer crushed diamonds. And finally, he managed it. It worked. So he went to Kodak to see it, because they were actually injecting glass lenses. Mm-hmm. And so he went there to learn more about how you inject mold optics, although ours were working fine. And at the end of it, this is an interesting story. The guy there who was their expert said, maybe you can teach us some things that we don't know. John was that extraordinary, and he still is. He still does consulting, and the type of jobs that he gets are usually, he did some satellite stuff that people couldn't figure out. It's usually the type of things that you just can't believe.
Gives up on.
Yeah, that they give up on. And he's a real gentleman, fun person to talk to.
Nice. What haven't I asked you that I should have?
That's a good question.
We went through the.
I'm trying to think.
Birth, the rise, the trials and tribulations, and the.
When you think of from 1980 to today, that's 35 years. Mm-hmm. The transitions that have occurred in that time period are just almost, both socially, culturally, technologically. I mean, it's enormous, absolutely enormous. So what you do is the historical element of a lot of this is really fascinating. I mean, you go back to the early parts of the computer days. There are a lot of things I would call Rube Goldberg, and perhaps someone someday will say, well, the Cauzin Softstrip reader was what Rube Goldberg. But some of the things that were done before now, everything is really on a chip, and it was fascinating.
Great that you're recording these histories and things, because as I said earlier, technology moves so fast, and I wonder how much history's been lost just because it's been forgotten before it ever, ever took hold or made any kind of an impact. And folks have moved on, and 100 years from now,
right?
Who's gonna, where's the history? So much of it's gonna be gone.
Well, I was in the toy industry very actively. When a friend of mine who was at Bell Labs with me, his name was Wendell Thomas, And as a matter of fact, his wife was on our carpool when I used to commute. And he had come up with the first electronic toy. Now, you probably will think of it as the one with the colors that you will touch. Well, no, there was one prior to that.
Okay.
And it was really taking the game of submarine or battleships and made it electronic. And so that was kind of the first really big instep into the toy business by that. He'd be a fascinating person to find. I'm trying to remember who did it. It wasn't Parker Brothers.
Milton Bradley did Electronic Battleship, I think.
Yeah, it was Electronic Battleship.
I think that was Milton Bradley. Yeah.
That was Wendell Thomas. Again, a fascinating individual. So if you can track him down, you'd have a very interesting conversation.
See if I can. I think I have one last question for the two of you. So thinking specifically about the Apple II realm, which is how I discovered you guys. If you could send a message to the home computer users who used Softstrip back in the day, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
Send a message back to the Softstrip users of the day?
Yeah.
What do we tell them?
I'd say don't throw it away. Someday your grandchildren will be glad you saved it because it will go on eBay and they'll make a bloody fortune.
Nice. So, Bob, if you have anything in your attic or in your basement related to Cauzin and Softstrip that I could see, if you could scan it or let me borrow it and scan it, I'd love to see it. Any technical stuff or just whatever you've got. I'm sure that some of the listeners would love to see that stuff.
Well, I'll see if I can find.
I know I've got a box of stuff. Especially being in on the marketing and product management side, I've got brochures and.
Oh, okay. Why you would have
finding the box will be the challenge, and yeah, I'd be happy to.
I'm trying to think of where I actually had the Softstrip reader with a
clear reader.
The clear reader, so where you could actually see the
video that. In action.
Oh yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah. So and if you find any media, any software or anything, I have an Apple II behind me. It's easy enough for me to move it to archive it, move it to modern computers. So.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Do you have a reader? Do you have a Softstrip reader?
I don't have a Softstrip reader. No.
Do you have any left?
I probably do.
The only one that I have is the clear one.
Yeah.
I might.
Well, actually, it would be interesting if you could find it and send it to you, and also the software to print out Softstrips.
Yeah.
And if you have an old dot matrix printer,
sure I do. Oh, that'd be fun. I'd like to do that. Awesome.
Great.
Well, thank you both very much.
well,
Thanks for taking the time.
and good luck with this. Is fast. I love history, and I think it's nice when the fundamentals of history are just a few years back, as opposed to decades or decades. Let's say generations or hundreds of years.
Sorry to say that Cauzin is it. Yeah, Cauzin is history. So.
That's right. I know. But that happens. Think about all of the things that are history that brought us to this point.
Right. So, this will be published in a couple of months. I will let you guys know when it is. And,
Okay.
That'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
All right,
both
Kevin.
so much.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
If you enjoyed these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a nonprofit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. They've done incredible things to preserve computer history, including hosting thousands of programs in an in-browser Atari emulator, creating the Wayback Machine, and offering full-page scans of countless Atari computer books and magazines. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.